4 months ago, I started a new free-to-play account to see what it's like for new players starting Honkai Star Rail in 2.0. This is a review of that experience. On the starter banner, we pull Clara, and because this was the last few days when Raisha was still available, we also pick him up. The campaign then gives us enough standard banner orbs to pull Welt soon after. At this point, because of my affection for girls in heavy armor and doomed fates, I decide to save for the Firefly team. The next month was spent beating all the content and farming some basic traces and relics for Clara and Raisha. This gets us to a point where we can clear 7 stages of Memory of Chaos and 2 stages of Pure Fiction without having used any Stellar Jade yet. So, for the second month of the project, while waiting for Firefly, I did basically nothing but farm trace materials. At TL60, it takes a week of farming to get Ascension and trace materials for a new character, which means that if you're building an entire new team, as I was with Firefly Super Break, that takes about 4 weeks. However, the break team can shave off a few days because it doesn't need all the traces. So I was able to use the spare time to finish off the traces for Clara and Raisha. After 2 months of saving, the Firefly banner is finally here and it's time to pull. After 78 pulls, we lose to Japart. Then 76 pulls later, we get Firefly. Next, we have to get Ruin Mei. Firefly doesn't really work without her. After 63 pulls, we lose to Himiko, which is not ideal, but is also in a way clutch. And then after 75 pulls, we get Ruin Mei. But we still have Jade left, so let's keep going. We don't have enough Jades to guarantee Firefly's E2, so let's do something conventional thoughts as free-to-play players should never do and pull Ruin Mei's Lightcone. Without it, Firefly team rotations are a lot clunkier, and it also makes it easier to get her to the 180 break effect threshold that she needs. We win the 75-25 after 69 pulls. Now, we're going to break conventional thought again, and use the remaining Jade to pull for Firefly's Lightcone. There's 2 reasons I do this. First, we only got 1 copy of Memories of the Past for Harmony MC, and I want to get her to S5 if possible. Second, one of my main DPS is Clara, and all of these pulls also gave me E6 Misha and E6 Shrei. If I'm running Firefly as one of my main characters, I can't have Aeon permanently stuck on her because I will also need it for these other characters. After 70 pulls, we win the 75-25 again. We won twice, lost twice, overall average luck.
Sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
Now that we have Firefly package assembled, I did what everyone else did at that time and went to play Shadow of the Erdtree. Don't be surprised, I just farmed traces for the past month and Firefly's set just released, so I didn't have any relics for her and needed to farm. Besides, endgame content rotates every 6 weeks now, so there's no rush to do it immediately, and we can take our time. Wait a second. Firefly, is that you? What are you doing here?
Like fireflies to a flame, life begets death. Set the scene
Oh shit!
ablaze! This is more than a battle.
I think the wife is mad we're not spending time with her.
Live to fight! Fight to live!
Okay. Let's get back to start.
Hit him down!
We're now 3 months into the project, so let's do some endgame, starting with Memory of Chaos. At first I started with a Clara follow-up team, but it quickly became obvious the damage and healing were too low. So let's change strategy by putting Firefly on Argenti and give Japard as the sustain for that team. This isn't optimal, but Firefly will still be able to clear in 2 cycles. On the other side, we will have Himiko as the main DPS. We will give her Gallagher to make sure the team doesn't die, and to help with breaking. Unfortunately, the second side takes a long time, and we're going to miss the full stars by half a cycle. I tried some 0 cycle setups on the Firefly side, but I didn't have the relics to keep the team alive, and somebody kept always dying. Still, missing only 1 star is pretty good. Let's move on to Pure Fiction. Physical enemies with a follow-up whimsicality should be great for Clara, right? Unfortunately, this happens. I tried a bunch of things moving characters between both sides, but in the end the problem with enemies not hitting Clara in Wave 2 was just too much. The best I managed was 57,000, again missing 1 star. Next is the new mode Apocalyptic Shadow. Firefly does fine on her side, but Ratio does not do so well on his side. Not being able to kill a shield with a Ratio skill is a big problem, and the budget team ends up falling behind. We missed 2 stars here, so let's go back to farming relics. We come back a month later with a new weapon, Hunt March 7. Memory of Chaos first. The enemies flipped sides, and so we're going to flip our teams as well, except this time we are running March 7 with our Himiko. This side still takes a long time to clear, but March 7 does enough toughness damage to make this safe, and allows us to use links without worrying about dying. The new March 7 deserves an entire episode talking about how she's a game changer on her own, but the short of it is that she's a lot of toughness damage, a lot of personal damage, and she's entirely skill point positive, which is huge. Himiko ends up 9 cycling this, which looks bad. Can we finish it? March allows us to return Gallagher to Firefly, which significantly improves the performance of that team. In the month past, we also got the speed tuning to get Firefly to 3 turns in Wave 1, which allows her to finish Wave 1 without using Gallagher's ultimate, and eventually allows us to 1-cycle Argenti. Full Star Memory of Chaos is finished. Next is Pure Fiction. Here we have, again, physical enemies. I wonder how they're going to screw Clara now. Wait a second, these enemies actually attack her?
You know how long I've been waiting for this? Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here.
I don't think you guys walk away from this.
You just make sure people know what happened here today. And when you get out of here, you have a drink for me.
Imagine that. When enemies actually attack Clara, instead of just debuffing her, Clara does perfectly fine. On the second side, the Himiko and Herta engine shows its power. We do one trick by converting the MC to their now forgotten preservation mode. The conversion allows to keep the team alive, as well as increasing the amount of shatters that we apply from the MC's ultimate. We finish with a comfortable 62,000. Finally, Apocalyptic Shadow. I'm confident with the Firefly team, so on the Ratio team, I just want to make sure that nobody dies. Welt and March do a ton of imaginary break and keep the team safe. And while the overall pace is slow, we get to the finish line. Welt's ultimate helps make up time by keeping Kafka broken for a longer time, which increases our damage, and we're able to finish safely. It's close. Can Firefly get us full stars? Of course, that's why we invested in her. With some learning and adjustment to the rotations, she beats the Doombringer with a full cycle to spare. 4 months after starting the project, we have beaten the game. Alright, the project is finished. We have completed the endgame. Let's do a review of the games and our thoughts and lessons that we learned. Every account usually has to start with the starter warp, so let's begin with that. We obviously started with Clara. I was excited when I got her. Overall, I think she underperformed in the past 3-4 months. But it's not entirely her fault for several reasons. First of all, we never got her any support. She would have done better if we got her Robin. 2, she didn't get her signature. I think she really kind of wants her signature Lightcone. It's hard to play the teams that she's with Lynx because both of them end up being skill point hungry, but if Lynx could be more skill point positive because the signature Lightcone helps with the healing on Clara, I think Clara would do better, allow you to play more aggressively, get more aggressive supports like Yukong. So that's the second reason. And the third reason is that obviously the stages were not helpful. tons of enemies that just wouldn't count as an attack against her and wouldn't trigger her counter. If those enemies were changed so that whenever they cast the spell that debuffs your party and that counted as an attack, Clara would have performed much better. But that being said, she obviously contributed. She was pivotal to getting the final stars in Pure Fiction in this most recent one. And so, I'm satisfied with her. I think she's a decent tier 1 pick. Besides that, Bronya, I think, has kind of fallen off. She's obviously probably still the best pull that you can get, because you do want some supports on the non-Hyper Break team. But a lot of the supports that we've been getting in the 2.0 meta, like Hyper Break and the Follow-Up and Nihility Acheron, and now Fei Xiao, they a double DPS, they sort of want other supports. They don't want Bronya. Bronya can get is getting a boost now because of Fei Xiao, and she does work with Boot Hill. But in general, it's a very different situation from 1.0, where Bronya was getting DPS constantly that she wanted to be with, like Blade and Jane Lu. And on top of that, we have better, in general, more aggressive supports like Robin and Ruan Mei and even Sparkle. So I think she has fallen off. And I think she's fallen off to a point where I think if you're re-rolling and like you're intent on re-rolling and you get Himiko, I think you don't re-roll, because she might be the best person on the standard banner right now. Unless you're rolling Fei Xiao in the next patch as a new player and you are not rolling for Robin, which is probably a mistake. And in that case, Bronya could be serviceable and do fine. But Himiko in general is like very good. She's very good on the Hyper Break team. She got a huge buff from that. She's obviously one of those characters that kind of solves Pure Fiction for you. Because the Pure Fiction Himiko Herda engine is very powerful. And so just having one side of Pure Fiction permanently solved is very good, because if you can 40k one side, you don't really need to have anything special for the other side. Pretty much anything can get you to 60k at that point. So I actually think that Himiko might be the best pick right now. And obviously on our endgame clear, she was pretty clutch. And if I hadn't pulled her, I probably would have had to pull something like... I would have actually had to use Stellar Jade for pulling either Jade herself or maybe probably Argenti. Argenti could have been used to do the physical coverage, which would have solved the problem that I had in Pure Fiction, as well as in Memory of Chaos. Besides that, Welt is a weird character who I used a lot early on before I used my Stellar Jade pulls on Firefly, and then I basically stopped using him for a long time, and then at the very end he came back again. I think for new accounts he's a decent pull, partially because he makes it easier for your healer to sustain your team. There was a lot of sustain problems on the Link side, and Welt was usually the best way of slowing down the enemy damage enough that they wouldn't kill the team before Lynx's slow heals over time could heal the team. Besides that, I think Japard, Bailu, and Yanqing unfortunately are dead weight at this point, and if they're your first pull on your starter banner, I would honestly recommend re-rolling for one of the other 4 characters. They're just not helpful. We'll talk more about Japard and Bailu later, but re-rolling takes about 45 minutes, and considering it's a character that you're going to be investing a lot of resources in, I think it might as well go for one of these 4. All right. The next thing to talk about is resource management, and specifically the Battle Pass, which is something a new player will be looking at and thinking whether they should buy it. My opinion is no, you should basically never buy this Battle Pass. Because it's mostly wasted. The reason why is because most of the resources that it gives you is XP books, Aethers, and credits. And early on in 1.0, we had so few resources that this Battle Pass made sense. But over time, there's now so many extra quests and so many expansions to the simulated universe that we didn't have in 1.0 that in this run, I basically never needed any of those resources. I never had to buy the Battle Pass. I never felt pressure to buy it. The only thing that's interesting on this Battle Pass is these tiers. But the tiers that you end up getting from the Battle Pass for your traces, it's only about 2 days worth of farming for traces. And then on top of that, you get some extra fuel, which is about a day and a half. So 3 days and a half of resource farming for $10, it's probably not worth it. If you're going to give any money to the game, you probably should just buy the monthly pass and use those Stellar Jade to refresh, and that will give you, and just use it to refresh for trace materials, which are your main bottleneck, slowing you down, and that will be a lot more value for you as a new player. The one interesting thing about this Battle Pass is actually for a new player, it's kind of a trap, because if they're not super savvy about how the resources end up working out in the Star Rail economy, when you're hitting Trailblaze level 60, you're preparing for the end game, you're basically in a energy deficit, right? Because you need to farm up all these traces for all these characters. And so if you get this Battle Pass, obviously you can get 3.5 days of relevant energy. But the trap is that these Battle Pass actually give enough books to take a character from 0 to 80. But they only give you enough trace materials, as we discussed, to do about a quarter of the trace and ascension energy that you need to do. So a new player might be hitting Trailblaze 60, looking at all the extra XP books that he has, and so they would end up using these XP books to level up characters that are not exactly helpful for their team. And by doing that, they would actually be putting themselves into a deficit even further than they were before of energy. So for example, I could have, if I bought this Battle Pass, I could have leveled up Shui Yi or Misha right away, but that actually would have done basically nothing for my team and for my ability to clear the end game at that moment. So just something to be aware of for new players. Next, let's talk about the characters, starting with Firefly, the queen of the show. Obviously, terrific character. Very happy with her and her package. She, works very well, fun to play, flashy. Doesn't work that well in pure fiction, but I think that's a good balance for her because it gives you a good reason to want to pull for E2, invest more in her so that she works everywhere. And I think that's a good way to balance the characters. I think that's where they should be. Two things I want to say about her. It's a good thing that her base power level is pretty high because she's actually kind of hard to build for. She really only wants speed and break effect. And attack power is like a distant third for her. So realistically, those pieces are a lot more rare than just crit rate, crit damage pieces, in my opinion. On top of that, she's also competing with the rest of her team for the same pieces. Basically, all of these characters only want speed and break effect. They don't want anything else. So that's kind of an issue that previous hyper carries, like even like Acheron or Jinwu or Imbibitor, they never really had because the stats that they were interested in were very different from the stats that their supports wanted. And it's an issue that Firefly has, but also I foresee it with Fei Xiao as well, where her sub DPS and her basically want the same exact pieces. And if you're not pulling Robin, it gets worse. If you're like, I'm going to use March 7, then suddenly you have 3 Hunt characters that want the same exact pieces and the same light cones. It's kind of a mess. I think pulling for Robin is pretty important if you're pulling for Fei Xiao. The second thing I want to mention about her is that I don't regret pulling her. We were doing waifu pulling, and I think that the project shows that waifu pulling works as long as you feed your waifu, a happy wife, happy life. But strategically, if I was trying to optimize this project and like go for something like clearing endgame as fast as possible, Firefly is kind of a disaster because she's super dependent on this team. Critfly doesn't really work. Critfly needs like other supports, like super high investment supports like Robin and so on. And so this like Firefly doesn't add enough to the account over something like this super budget super break team to justify the investment in her. If you want to go super fast, because this fire-based Asta hyper break team is not going to 0 or 1 cycle, but it's going to do fine on its own. It's probably going to like 5 or 6 cycle. And that's enough for the other side's invested team to finish up the job in a much easier manner than I was able to do. So if I were to do it all over again, I don't regret it doing it at the time because, first of all, I wanted to make sure I had enough Stellar Jade for Firefly and Ruin Mei, because as we know, Firefly doesn't really work without Ruin Mei either. But also because, as far as I know, I'm the only one who's ever done this project. Nobody really showed us that, but now we know that after about 2 months of play, the game has enough Stellar Jade to get you to about 400 pulls. And so, even more after converting Dust and so forth. You have about 3 characters worth of guaranteed pulls in the first 2 months. So, knowing that now, I probably would have just pulled Robin. And I recommend that for people starting now. If you're going to be playing in the next couple of months, I definitely recommend either pulling Fei Xiao and Robin or both Swan and Kafka. The Robin team is probably more flexible because Robin can be carried around to different DPS. But the other team that you should have is obviously the Super Break team. So you have one team for one side, you have Super Break, which is super flexible. You just slot in whatever element you need on this 4th slot. And, the game is super friendly to new players at this point right now. Besides that, I just want to talk about the fact that the game gives you a lot of free resources that are very good for the problems that it's presenting you with. Herda obviously fell off for a long time until Pure Fiction came out, and now not investing in Herda is like a big mistake because Herda solves Pure Fiction for one side, and so on the other side you only need like 25k to max out at 60. And the same goes for the new MC and March 7. They're very good. They go into a Super Break shell. They solve one side of Apocalyptic Shadow and Memory of Chaos for you. Ratio obviously is not free anymore. And I think he was free because he was coming around the time that the power creep really started happening. And so I think MiHoYo strategically knew they needed some good character for free-to-play players to have, or like new players to have, to solve one side of Memory of Chaos and like serve as a bridge until the new MC in March came out later in 2.4, 2.5, etc. And so I think that's why Ratio was free, not because of any celebration reasons that they were saying at the time. But the point is, these resources are good. When Ratio came out, people were saying he's not free-to-play friendly or new player friendly. I think people who didn't listen to that advice obviously suffered for it, because obviously I depended on Ratio a lot in this run, and he was pretty powerful and not that impossibly difficult to make work. There's a lot of different ways to do it with either GUI or Welt or Pella herself. Basically, the resources are good and you should be using them for sure as a new player. And the reason you should be using them because the alternative is like even these 4 stars that on paper are good suffer a lot in the 2.0 game. I think this is like where the power creep really hit the hardest, where these characters kind of have a hard time keeping up. So if you asked me at the start of the project how well this team would do, this right here, I would have looked at it and said, oh, you know, I mean, all of these are high level high tier 4 stars. They probably will do like a 3 cycle in MOC 12, like a comfortable 3 cycle. But the reality for a new account is very different. First of all, like Ratio is a good character, but as a new account, you don't have perfect relics, so you probably lose a cycle there. Pella, my Pella has S2 resolution shines, which I got lucky to get, but without it, without S5 resolution shines, you're probably losing a cycle. Ting Yun does have 1 copy of Dance Dance Dance, S1, that I was lucky to get, but without S5, she's probably losing a cycle. In addition, because this is the only copy of Ting Yun that we've seen in the past 6 months, and now that we know the Fei Xiao banner doesn't have Ting Yun, it's 8 months, she's missing all her Eidolons, and her Eidolons are actually kind of important. So you're losing another cycle there, and then because it's taking so long for this team to kill anything, you know, Lynx has to skill more often than she would otherwise, and so maybe Ratio has to skip an attack because Lynx needs to make sure nobody dies, so you lose a cycle there. Like, you just start losing a lot of time on all of these pieces, and it really adds up for a new player. And so it's a nice thing that, you know, these new characters that we're getting, the free-to-play ones, like, they're very good, and they come with all of their Eidolons ready and, you know, set to go. You should definitely be using them to make your own life easier, but also make it less painful on your Stellar Jade. If you want to pull, if you want to swipe your card, then none of this matters. But if you want to be free to play or low spend, definitely invest in these. Finally, I want to talk about sustains that were available to me. The one mistake that I made was leveling Japard. It didn't cost me that much resources. It was really just the Ascension materials. I didn't need the extra XP books. I didn't really use any trace material farming for him. Most of his traces are still at 1. He can sustain just fine, but the problem is that he is nothing to offer for resisting debuffs and crowd control. And honestly, I know he had a bit of a resurrection after Acheron came out because he's a good wearer for trends, but in general, I think he's terrible, and he's really not that much better than Bailu. Because there's just so much crowd control in higher endgame bosses now that there's no point even bringing him. Hule doesn't really have any crowd control that I can think of, so Japard might be okay at that in the new cycle of bosses, but in general, he's not great. Who is great, however, is Gallagher. Gallagher is such a power creep over all of these other sustains because he does a ton of healing. All of that healing is reactive because the DPS can heal themselves. And he's entirely skill point positive. You basically, the only time you ever use a skill point on him is because you want to get the ult faster or because you want to cleanse something. It's almost never because you want to heal something. And so that entire package is just so insanely strong. It's strong to the point where I wonder if you're re-rolling a new account, I think it might be better to just re-roll for Gallagher. Like, forget Bronya, forget Himiko. You just want to get Gallagher in the first, 80 pulls or whatever that you get. And if you don't get him, just reroll again. Like, that process takes like 2 hours, but he might be worth it. But if you don't get Gallagher, I think my opinion on this changed from the beginning. In the beginning, I thought getting a sustain is always a waste of time. And I think getting a sustain may make sense in one of your first pulls in the first 4 months, because especially if it's a sustain that increases a DPS for one of your main teams, or improves how they work. So Linkshaw for Super Break, or really any team, but Linkshaw for Super Break, or like if your main team is going to be, like a follow-up team, like something like a Fei Shao team, and then your Super Break team is going to be your secondary team. Getting a Linkshaw to give that team a little bit more break and a little bit more damage might make sense. Aventurine for the follow-up team, stuff like that. I think it makes sense to get them, especially since you don't really need Lightcones for those characters ever. Because, Lynx, having your team be like Lynx and Gallagher, or even Lynx and Natasha, strictly speaking, they can get the job done. And they have clans, they can heal. But the way the game is right now, I think it makes a lot of sense to have support that can actually do good damage. Let's talk about Lightcones real quick. In general, I think that free-to-play players and new players should be pulling Lightcones every so often for their pivotal characters. And I don't regret having pulled the Lightcones for Ruin Mei and for Firefly. Pulling the Lightcones helps a lot with economy, I believe, because if you're only pulling characters, you're spending a lot of energy building characters, traces, and ascensions, and you're not spending as much time farming relics, and I think that hurts characters a lot, on top of the fact that these characters don't have their Lightcones, which is already hurting them. But I also think I'm going to be vindicated by keeping this Aeon Lightcone free for my Shui and my Misha, because it didn't come up in this endgame run, but in the next Memory of Chaos, Aventurine is going to be one of the bosses, and so I'm going to be using Misha to DPS down that boss. And so obviously if I hadn't pulled the Lightcone for Firefly on her side, and Misha on his side would be fighting for the same Lightcone, it would have been an embarrassing and annoying problem to have. And so by having pulled it, I've made my Firefly and the rest of my team work exactly as they're supposed to, and as expected, but also it freed up the resources for the other side. Next, let's talk about relics. Based on the relics that I have, I think you can already tell what I farmed. But to give you some numbers, early on I farmed Watchmaker and Pioneer because that makes sense for my ratio and my Firefly. And then once Firefly came out, I farmed Cavalry and Valorous almost exclusively. And so that made a lot of sense for me. Although, for a new player starting out today, first, I would not recommend farming across different caverns. I think you should just focus on one cavern. And the second thing is what you farm should really depend on what you're going to be using for your teams. I'm assuming that you're going to be using Super Break as one of your teams. So for your second team, there's a lot of choices that you have. If you're going for Fei Shao Robin, Valorous and Iron Cavalry is perfect for you. Valorous works for Mose, for Fei Shao, and for Robin. And one nice thing about Valorous is that it actually works surprisingly well for all your other characters, especially the follow-up characters, the free ones that you're given. So the attack power and crit works for everybody, obviously, but the ultimate bonus, it helps Himiko, it helps Herta, especially in Pure Fiction when they're ulting a lot. But actually it helps Yanqing a lot as well. If you happen to pull Yanqing and for whatever reason plan on using him, then it's pretty good there. So it's a decent overall set for your non-break team. If you're planning instead to go for Acheron, Pioneer and Watchmaker makes a lot of sense. Watchmaker will help your super break team. If you're not going for either one of those, then you're probably going for something like Black Swan and Kafka, in which case it gets complicated because for Kafka, you could pull the Deep Confinement for her dot set, and then that comes with Ash Blazing. But Ash Blazing is actually not that universal. And it doesn't help break team at all, really. I think that if you are pulling for Kafka Black Swan, I would actually recommend going for the old tried and true Quantum Guard Cavern. Because the damage that you're dealing is so diverse that just having 10% shred on everything that you're doing is better than the alternatives. But also, and I think this part is underrated, is as you saw, survivability was kind of a problem in these early game accounts. And I think Withering Snow is underrated for new accounts especially. Having the extra reduction and some extra healing, it would help a lot for a character like Lynx to buy her enough time to heal properly. As for the best planer set, obviously I farmed Forge and Durin for my teams. In the past, a lot of players would have recommended Arena and Keel. I did a poll at the start of this project, and that's what most people recommended. I think this has fallen off because a lot of the characters being released don't really benefit from this anymore. We don't have Blade, we don't have Jinglu, we don't have Imbibitor. So I think right now, and I'm probably biased, but I do think Forge and Durin is very good. It feeds your break team. Pretty much any support or sustain on any team wants this 6% speed. And, if you're going Face Shao, this is a no-brainer, but even then, as we discussed previously, a lot of the free resources that you have do follow-ups. And so Durin ends up being a pretty good set for them. Otherwise, probably the best set might be Glamoth and Penacony, the 5% regen. Again, a lot of supports want that. It smooths out their curve for their ultimates, and a lot of the current teams being played, benefit from Glamoth. So Kafka and Swan benefit from this because they want to be super fast, but the Face Out teams could also use this as well, since they generally will end up being faster than Robin, and so they'll be around 135 speed. I think this is one of those sets that's up to the player. Finally, let's talk about the hot topic in the community throughout 2.0, really, which is power creep. The good news is that as a free-to-play new account, I didn't ever really feel pressured by it. There's a couple of reasons for it. The first reason is the game now throws so many XP books and credits at you that you never have to farm for them, and so that makes it much easier in terms of energy economy. Second reason is that the game also throws a lot of Stellar Jade at you. It throws 3 guaranteed pulls, and if you're getting any kind of luck, it's really 4 pulls. So whatever the power creep is happening at the moment, you're able to pull into it. If it's Acheron patch and Acheron's power creeping something, you can pull into that, guaranteed, as a new player. If Firefly is happening in my case, I can pull into that guaranteed. The third reason is that the Memory of Chaos, because it's a 6-week rotation now, it's basically guaranteed to benefit the current cycle of the characters, in which case is the characters you're pulling. So even though you're missing a lot of the relics on your characters, you're still pulling into the beneficial content cycle. And so it benefits you that way. And then finally, new accounts today have the benefit of the new March 7 and the new Harmony MC, which are both very powerful, complete in their kits, full of eidolons. And these are simply resources that we didn't have available to us in 1.0. New players basically have 2 slots out of their top 8 characters filled out from the start when they log into the game, really. And, it's a terrific resource that saves a lot of energy, saves a lot of resources, and provides a lot of power to these new players. In fact, I would say that Star Rail has a problem that it's actually too easy. The reason I'm saying that is because it's a very simple game. There's not a lot of ways for you to interact with the enemy except for breaking with them. And there's not a lot of ways for the enemy to interact with you except for crowd controlling you. So as soon as you have breaks and cleanses figured out, you're more or less settled into beating the enemy. It all comes down to a numbers game of you doing enough damage. And that's just an economic equation of like how you're managing your farming. And Jade accelerates that equation. And in fact, this equation is so biased in favor of the player relative to the enemy that the content around Star Rail ends up degenerating. In my opinion, it's degenerating, at least, to basically 0 cycles and insane stuff like, beating the game without ever pulling because you have perfect relics, stuff like that. In the long term, I think it's kind of unhealthy for the game. You can see that already in something like Simulated Universe. Basically, we're at the higher difficulties of Simulated Universe. There's not a lot of strategy because the enemies hit so hard that the only real way to beat the enemies is to freeze them or block them out of doing anything. And so then you have enough windows of opportunity to do your damage without them behaving. Similarly to actually 0 cycles, where, you just destroy the enemy while ignoring their mechanics because they can't do the mechanics fast enough before you kill them. I think in the long term, this is actually something that Star Rail is going to have to figure out how to resolve. It's going to have to make the game more complicated because it's going to get boring at some point. Finally, let's take a quick look at the relics that we have. I think this is a decent thing for new players to see of what they can expect after 1.5 months spent across roughly 2 relics set caverns. One of the problems with Firefly is that she really wants 165 speed, including 10 speed for Ruin May. And that's because she basically needs that threshold to get to 3 turns in her first cycle without getting anything special from a trotter. And the second problem is that the rest of her team actually wants to be faster than her, so that when she hits that trigger, that they already have used their abilities for the first time around, so that she's buffed up when she's doing it. And so in this case, we were able to do that. I'm pretty happy with this Firefly. She does need more break effect, but that's a work in progress. Crit damage, we had a good luck with our relic set for our Dr. Ratio. He had pretty good luck in the Pioneer set. These aren't exactly perfect pieces, only I think one of them is perfect, but they're very serviceable and they're all meta for him. So that's good. Besides that, we have 2 other sets. Valorous, I think Herda's wearing that one. The Valorous set luck that I've had has been a bit more average than I would hope. I would have hoped to have more perfect pieces. This crit damage piece is very good, especially if you're going for something like Fei Shao. The speed is excellent on it. And we do have a almost perfect boots for this set. And then finally, something I've been building on Himiko because she never got a good follow-up planar set for her. I have been building this semi-hyper break hybrid build. Really, this is something that I was intending to put on Shui Yi, and at some point I will. These pieces are better on Shui Yi, frankly, than on Himiko, but they work on Himiko, especially when I slot her into the hyper break team as a 4th DPS. So just a good idea of what you can expect to have after about a month and a half of farming. All right, I think that's everything. Let's wrap it up. The purpose of this project is basically now finished. We have done some important things. We have shown that a new player starting and playing for about 2 months will have about 450-ish pulls, which is more or less enough to guarantee 3 characters. With good luck, you have some Lightcones or even more characters there. Second, we've shown that it's possible to beat the game while investing inefficiently in a waifu after 3 to 4 months. And at this point, I expect to be able to finish all endgame content with full stars moving forward, because at this point I have 42,000 stellar jade, some pulls on top of that. It's about 320. I'll have more once the next patch comes out, so I'm basically guaranteed to have Fei Xiao and Robin, and on top of that I have armor sets for both of them. I don't expect to have problems with the game ever again. What is going to happen to this account moving forward is unclear. I think, as we discussed, the game is pretty easy, and so making interesting content for it is kind of hard. I think you in general have to have a freak account, like a no pull ever account or 4-star only account to make interesting content. If I were to pull Fei Xiao and Robin, this would basically become a normal account, meta slave account. So I probably won't do that. I have some ideas of what I want to do with it. There's a couple of videos that I want to do with this account still, so I'll probably do those. But if you have any ideas for what to do with this account, let me know in the comments. We'll see what happens. In the meantime, I guess let's just finish up with some pulls. Everybody loves pulls, so we have about 27 warps. I don't think we're that close to pity. We're probably like 45 pulls into pity, so we're gonna hit soft pity, but we don't expect to pull anything amazing here. But early pulls do happen, so let's see how it goes. A GUI. Good pull. I expect to be building GUI moving forward. 10 more. Swordplay. Not that useful at S1. Since I'm not pulling for Fei Xiao, I don't think I'll need it. And then a couple more final pulls for the closeout. Glad to have done this experience. Definitely learned a lot. Made me appreciate the game more. And it definitely changed the way I think about the game in terms of resources management and character pulling and just overall in-game strategy. And to get a Serval Eidolon. This is E1. Serval as Eidolons are pretty important. Serval is one of those characters that really shines once she gets her Eidolons. I mean, the 1.0 players remember how Serval was competing with Jing Yuan. Really, the Eidolon that you want is this E2, because this lets her spam her ultimate. So in the current perfection, for example, which is ultimate whimsicality, this would be very useful. But E1 just lets her basic hit a little harder. It makes her a good sub DPS for a new account. For a more advanced account like mine now, it's clearly not relevant, but it gets us to E2 faster. Anyway, that's it. I'll see you in the next one.